It's been a little while now since the release of Tactics Ogre Reborn, and we have not yet heard anything official from Square Enix about the potential for a Final Fantasy Tactics Reborn, if you will. Although we do have that leak from a while back for the GeForce Now list of games that were potentially coming out, many of which have, and Tactics was on that list. And we have also seen a survey come out from Square Enix recently, wherein one of the games they are asking about people's interest in a potential discussion of or creation of Final Fantasy Tactics Remake or Remaster was on there. So today, I want to talk about some of the things that I'd like to see in such a remake or remaster or reborn project, and why I want to see those things. So watch on and see if you agree. Hello everyone, my name is Tom, otherwise known as Titanium Legman. If you enjoy what I do, you enjoy my coverage of strategy RPGs, regular RPGs, things like Armored Core, gaming news in general, all that type of good stuff, a like on this video and a subscription would be very much appreciated. I'm a small YouTuber making YouTube my full-time career, and I need your help to be able to keep growing because it's a crowded ecosystem nowadays. So thank you so much if you do choose to do that. Moving on to the topic of the day. We don't know if we are getting this Tactics remaster, remake, whatever, which I think we are. I'm holding out hope. I'm hopefully not on copium right now. We shall see. If we do get this, though, what could be in it? What would it entail? Would it be a full, ground-up remake, Resident Evil 2 remake style type deal? Would it be something more along the lines of just a remaster project, updating the graphics, maybe some of the audio stuff, adding a couple fun things? Or would it be sort of an in-between, like Tactics Ogre Reborn itself is, where it's still very clearly built on the base of the PSP release with Let Us Clean Together, but, fully voiced script, fully reorchestrated soundtrack, completely rebalanced game systems, overall a lot of stuff, but without adding any new content or anything like that. Well, I think there's some different possibilities of what I'd like to see based on what type of project this could be. So first we're going to talk about what I think we should expect in a remaster, and then what we should absolutely expect in a remake. So remaster first. First of all, I mean, the most standard, obvious thing in any sort of game remaster ever, updated graphics, similarly to what we have with Tactics Ogre Reborn. In a remaster especially, I don't expect to see a complete change of style or graphics in pretty much any project, and I absolutely would not want to see that here with Tactics. It has such an iconic style, right? Those of us who know the game, who love it to death, or even have seen it, you can recognize it. The way the sprite work is done, the way the maps are designed, the way the actual character portraits are handled, the world map, all that type of stuff set the basis in a lot of ways for what the turn-based strategy RPG genre has done going forward. People think about that kind of diorama set-piece look of the maps where you have a semi-square-ish map. You can see off the sides of it. There's like a blue sky background. I mean, that's very Tactics Ogre and FFT, and I feel like FFT more than anything is the example that people go back to when they design new games in the genre. Indie titles, not so indie titles. They do that kind of look. And so I think changing any of those aspects would fundamentally change the way people view a remastered FFT. So I don't want to see any style changes there. I just want to see things brought up to the modern era. Because while the game has aged very well, it still does very much look like a PS1 game, even if you're playing War of the Lions on the PSP. The textures for trees and buildings and things in the battle map are quite dated. The sprites have carried over much better, but of course with HD displays and modern resolution settings and everything, it doesn't translate as well unless you're doing something like, say, Triangle Strategy with the HD 2D type of deal. So having something that works a little bit better in that type of format would be the way to go. I know a lot of people aren't a fan of the sort of smoothness of character sprites in Tactics Ogre Reborn, so maybe we could go for more of a still pixelated style. I think that would be the way to do it, while updating all of those background assets and maps and things like that to really make them pop would be great. Speaking of other things to remaster, the original soundtrack and the sound effects absolutely need to be brought up to date. In particular, the sound effects need some help, seeing as how they got compressed to hell and back for the War of the Lions release on the PSP. And having them not be quite so tinny and compressed and kind of bad sounding compared to the original PlayStation 1 release would be vital. some of those chunky hits and death screams and everything that you get in FFT are still impactful, even in War of the Lions, but man, they hit hard in the original PS1 release. So I'd either like to see those original files uncompressed, brought forward, touched up to just sound better in modern systems in more HD sound type of ways, or redone entirely to have new punch and new higher quality recording and all that type of stuff. For the OST, I think it's absolutely something that we should kind of expect to see brought forward into the modern era, maybe with a mix of digital editing as well as physical symphony, stuff like that. The OST in Tactics Ogre Reborn is just so good, and Final Fantasy has really come to be known for the quality of its soundtracks and how big and epic and orchestral they feel, and redoing Tactics in that sort of style would just be, oh my god, it would feel so good. Like, so many of the most amazing moments in things like Final Fantasy 16 were amplified even further by the fact that their OST was so good. So, like, imagine you could get Soken on that. Oh my lord. That would be incredible. So I would absolutely want to see that exist in the remastered version as well. Finally, I think one of the biggest things that really would need to be done for FFT is major balance changes. I know there's going to be people who get very upset about the idea of any balance changes, any gameplay changes being made to Tactics in general, but I absolutely think it needs to be done. I mean, we're talking about bringing Calculator down to not be the absolutely most busted thing on Earth, first and foremost. Anyone who's a reasonable fan of the game knows that that needs to be done. You know, when you have people like, you know, my friend and community member, Canadian Animator guy, who when he played Tactics for the first time a couple years ago, as soon as he got Calculator, like, that was it. His run was basically over because he would just nuke the entire battlefield with absolutely no recourse for the enemy to do anything about it. And that's no fun. That's things should not be that powerful, even if they're as hard to unlock as Calculator is, just in a time investment thing. Make it weaker, but mechanically interesting and still viable. And I think that'll be a better overall potentiality for a strategy army building type game like Final Fantasy Tactics is. Dark Knight as well, from the War of the Lions release, being brought down to a more reasonable state, not being completely busted as hell, and in turn making it easier to unlock earlier in the story. Dark Knight is obviously a very well-known, very popular job or class in Final Fantasy. It's one of the biggest tank classes in Final Fantasy XIV. A lot of major characters have been Dark Knights over the course of the series, and it's just cool. It's dark and edgy and fun, and it's very Final Fantasy, so having it be something that is accessible earlier in the game without being nearly as powerful, and again making it just another good tactical option, is absolutely something that I think that they should do. It was fun to have it added to War of the Lions as like a really cool end game for the OG players type of thing that you could unlock, but bring it down to normal and just make it part of the overall gameplay loop, please. I think that would be best for everybody. Other jobs that maybe have a little bit of a weaker presence but have a lot of potential, things like Orator, Archer, and Mystic, all being buffed would be really nice. Archer's kind of notorious for being super OP in Tactics Ogre, especially in Let Us Clean Together, but generally being considered to be pretty weak in Final Fantasy Tactics. I'd love to see that balanced a little bit. You know, they don't need to be Tactics Ogre Archers because that's a complete opposite shift. They're way too strong there. They were fortunately brought down a bit in Reborn. But having them just be a bit more viable overall, especially because there's very little other bow usage in Tactics in general, would be really nice. Whether that be changing the charge system to be more useful, or just making bows deal more damage or have better range or something, I think could go a long way to helping out archers. Orator is one of the most unique classes in the game. I really like it conceptually, but the low chance to hit, the low overall effect of a lot of their talk skills could definitely be touched up, and I definitely think they could be a really fun class. They just need to be modified in some capacity. And then finally, Mystic is another really fun class, and I love playing with status effects in pretty much any game that allows you to use them effectively. And while they're good in Tactics, just dealing outright damage is still typically the way to go. Like, why bother trying to blind an enemy and only reducing their chance to hit you when you could just blow them up with a huge Firaga spell and they're not a concern anymore, right? So either making status effects more powerful or making it more likely that a Mystic could actually land their spells and get those status effects to stick could go a long way in increasing their viability, because it is a fun class. I like it as sort of a mixed melee damage and status effect casting job. It's awesome. I really, really enjoy it, actually. But it just needs a little bit of help. Fans of Orlando, you know what I'm about to say. Man's got to be brought down. Like, I know he's Thunder God Sid. I know he's the Sword Saint. Like, he's real strong, and he should be real strong. But he's a little too strong. Again, he's another one of those characters that just makes things a joke if you decide to just lean on him, and that's fine. I think he can still be one of the most powerful characters in the game without completely outclassing everything. Whether you change his equipment and how effective it is, or change him and how effective he is, something like that, I think would be reasonable. There's a reason that people who are fans of the game and have been playing it for years and years just don't use him, because it takes all the fun out, right? So bringing characters like that down, I think, would be a wise decision. Finally, having integrated multiplayer support, I think, is an absolute must. The multiplayer in War of the Lions is so cool. Being able to duel your friends, or being able to do co-op missions with unique objectives and cool enemy formations and rewards to get, is super fun, man. It works so well with the systems that Tactics has. It doesn't need to be something that's super competitive or anything like that. I'm not worried about them making balance changes to the arena like it's Armored Core or something like that. But just having those systems from War of the Lions be expanded on and easier to use, utilizing things like Steam and the online frameworks that we have now, even just if it's on PlayStation through PSN, like, that's fine. But just let people do these things. It's such good content, and it went so underappreciated in the PSP era, because it was so hard to find someone that had the game on PSP around the same level as you. Now, with the power of the internet, we can just completely avoid any of those issues. So I absolutely want to see that fully integrated, maybe expanded on. It would increase the shelf life of the game so substantially, and it'd be so much fun. Now, that's the remaster side of things. There's a lot of changes to discuss there, but if this is more of a reborn or remake project, I think that there's a lot more that can be done and probably should be done to do the game justice. So let's talk about that next. First off, I mean, of course, pretty much everything that we just said would be still applicable here and pretty much expected, so you can add that all onto the list. But then there's some other big stuff as well. Just like Tactics Ogre Reborn did, full voice acting, I think, is an absolute must. It brings the overall narrative of the game up so much if you have good quality voice acting. Like, the story of Tactics Ogre is well regarded in, circles in the know as being one of the best stories in game. And I think Final Fantasy Tactics is absolutely up there as well, if for different reasons compared to the story of Denim and his journey. So having that same quality of voice acting, that same care and dedication put into it, would be huge. I would love to see what they do with some of these really emotionally impactful scenes in Tactics if it was voice acted. Like, we saw a little bit of that with War of the Lions, with a lot of the really nice animated cutscenes that they added to the game, and I did really enjoy the voice acting in those cutscenes. So just imagine that for the whole game. Imagine the finale of Chapter 1. No spoilers here, but just those of you who know, with Delita and everything. Like, we saw a little bit of it with the cutscene that ended Chapter 1 in War of the Lions. If that whole battle had full VA, incredible. It would be incredible work. So I think a full VA package is a must for a Reborn or a remake project. Then adding in more side quests, a significant content upgrade, is something I would personally really like to see. Again, we didn't see this with Tactics Ogre Reborn, but that's because they already did it for the Let Us Cling Together version that they were building off of. And they did that for the War of the Lions version of Final Fantasy Tactics as well. There is a decent amount of expanded side quest content, but I would love to see even more. There's so many cool characters, there's so many cool settings, there's so much cool background in the game that could be expanded on and turned into side quests, into new battles, new bosses, new gear, all that type of stuff. I personally would love to see it. It probably wouldn't happen since they didn't do it with Tor, but who knows? It would be an absolute blast. Having expanded dungeons in the vein of Tactics Ogre would be really cool as well. That's something that I feel has always kind of been missing from FFT. Like, you've got one cool, like, end game dungeon, and then a bunch of, like, little side quest missions where you go through, like, a series of battles and whatnot. And that's fun, and they're kind of like dungeons, but they're not repeatable, right? Like, I mean, the end game dungeon is, but there's only so much to do there anyway. Having repeatable dungeons where you can actually get different gear and there's different quests and reasons to go to them and everything would be so much fun. And yeah, it might not work as well in the tighter narrative that FFT has compared to the more sprawling war campaign epic that Tactics Ogre has, but having more environments and more battles and more situations to test out your army in, to actually have a reason to use different characters and build different characters with different job specializations would be awesome. Just more stuff that you can really sink your teeth into, especially in Chapter 4, where there's most of the side quest content anyway. I would absolutely adore that. I think it would be great for the game. Speaking of cutscenes and everything from earlier in this remake discussion, I think just having more animated cutscenes in the vein of the War of the Lions release would be huge. Those cutscenes add so much. I don't think everything needs to be a cutscene. Like, not every pre- and post-battle conversation needs to be a fully animated cutscene. There's so much charm to be had in little sprite animations and everything like that, but just having a few more big, full-blown cutscenes would go a long way. You know, I'm thinking about the end of Chapter 3 with the big war that breaks out, the titular War of the Lions. Having an animated cutscene of that happening instead of just a text scroll at the end of the chapter would be awesome. Do that for all of the chapters. I think that would go a long way to evolving the narrative and really showing the scale of the story, since it's very focused on Ramza, as it should be, but being able to see more of the scope of what's happening in the world would make understanding his story and why it's so important all the better. So I'd say bring on some more cutscenes. Having some new jobs, I think, could be an absolute blast. You know, compared to when War of the Lions came out, there's been a slew of new Final Fantasy games that have released, especially with FF14. So if you could take some of the jobs that exist in Final Fantasy Tactics Advance, A2, FF14, other Final Fantasy releases, and incorporating them into FFT for the ones that make sense, would be a blast. Give us red mages. Give us other, like, green mages, blue magic. Give us fighters and paladins, and expand that roster out even more. And I think you could do a lot there. They'd have to be careful, of course, not to make certain things redundant, not to kind of make the ability to build your own class through combining different class skills unnecessary, but I absolutely think that they could do it while adding in a bunch of fun new stuff. And that would breathe a lot of life into the game as well. A lot of us have played this game so much, we know what all the combinations are. By adding a bunch of new things, though, that's where things could get really interesting, and it could shake up some of the established gameplay loops that we've all fallen into in the last 20 years. As far as other new additional content is concerned, the only other thing that I would really want to see would be potentially new cameos. You know, we've seen characters show up in the War of the Lions remake, such as Luso from FFT A2, other characters that I won't get into for the sake of spoilers, but there are some cool crossovers and things like that that can be done in FFT, and since there's already an established precedent for it, adding in a few others that make sense, I think would be really cool. You know, whether they be characters from other Ivalice games and other Final Fantasy characters in general, could be really nice. You know, with Final Fantasy VII Remake continuing to go on, maybe you toss in some characters from that, or just get like Clive in there from FF16. Who knows? Why not? It's fun. Having little things like that that can happen in side quests is an absolute blast, and I don't think they have to limit themselves to just like Ivalice characters like Luso. Finally, there's some other types of systems that have shown up in other games, whether they be indie games or bigger releases like Triangle Strategy, that I think could really work in FFT and would be nice to see. Something like Crimson Tactics with its expanded mount system, I think is an absolute blast. It's really cool that you can ride chocobos and actually have a few different types of gameplay things go on in FFT, but it's very limited. People have always talked about how it's kind of like, it's cool, but there's more that could be done with it. Well, what if they did more with it, right? Have more mounts, more than just chocobos, but other types of creatures. Imagine if you could like hop on the back of a Querl or ride around on a Minotaur's shoulders or whatever. Like, that'd be a blast. That'd be so cool. Being able to do that and have more attacks available, maybe have it not be as limiting, like you can bring in a mount just for a character to use without it taking up a deployment slot, that'd be a blast. Like, there's cool things that could be done there that would, again, expand out the tactical options that we would have available and freshen up the whole game, which would be a blast. And then, really, I think just sprucing up the poaching system would be nice. You know, having thieves, having the ability to poach, get cool items, that would be really fun, but it was clearly a side thing in the original release. It's not something that was ever really talked about as like a major system. If you never even had a character with poach equipped, you wouldn't even really know that it existed, honestly. And while you can get cool stuff from it, it's only really in the late game with focused grinding and breeding of monsters and everything that you can get the best stuff. So making it a little bit more of a fleshed out system, making it a little bit more apparent from the onset, and having more cool and interesting items that you can get from poaching to reward doing so, while also, again, maybe expanding the mount system, making monster units more viable and more interesting to use. That would be a nice kind of additional way to get cool gear beyond just waiting for the shops to update and stealing stuff from bosses, right? And those are all of the ideas that I have for a remake or remaster or reborn project for FFT. What do you think? Are there things that you'd like to see in such a project that I didn't mention here? Do you maybe disagree or agree with some of the things that I talked about? Let me know in the comments. This is a conversation that I would love to have, and I would love to kind of encourage on the internet, to show that there's interest in this project and hopefully maybe get Square to finally actually do something with it and keep us all from driving ourselves insane. And also to put some ideas out there into the ether, because you never know who's listening to what and who's watching what and what ideas could be incorporated into the type of project that we would all love. So have that discussion. I'll certainly be in the comments chatting along with y'all. And just thank you for watching. It's been an absolute pleasure being able to cover these types of games on the channel ever since Tactics Ogre blew up on the channel, and I can only hope that we're able to continue to do so in the future with the eventual release of what I'm currently calling Final Fantasy Tactics Reborn. With all that said, though, I'm going to wrap this one up here. My name has been Tom, otherwise known as Titanium Legman. Hope you all have a good night. Stay safe and healthy out there, and remember, be good to each other. Bye now.